The D500, Nikon's new flagship DX, which is a crop sensor body, was announced in early January. This is going to be available in mid-March if you get your pre-orders in now. It's going to sell really well and likely be hard to get in the first few weeks if you don't pre-order it. I'm going to share why it's going to sell so well in a minute, and while at the same time, some forums are dismissing this camera as a total joke. But let's talk specs and make some comparisons. Before we really start talking about the D500, I want to make sure that you know about the PhotoRec TV African Safari giveaway. It is as amazing as it sounds, all expenses included, a pile of additional prizes. All of the details are at photorec.tv/giveaway. Now, let's chat about the D500. It offers a 20 megapixel DX format CMOS sensor, and this is going to be paired with their newest XPEED 5 imaging processor. Now, interestingly, this is actually a little bit less than the Nikon D7200, which sits at 24 megapixels. Why would you introduce a more expensive camera with a lower megapixel count? I think many of you know, but two big reasons. Better low light performance, and this is the big one, being able to hit 10 frames a second with a deep buffer. Now, 20 megapixels is plenty for large prints while still being small enough to squeeze through that processor pipeline. And this is a smidge more than the 7D Mark II, which I'm sure Nikon is happy to talk about. So let's talk a little bit more about that low light performance. By the numbers, we have ISO from 100 to 50,200, and you can boost this to 1,640,000. Yes, 1 million. Now, Nikon suggests a noticeable improvement over the D7200. I don't expect amazing improvements, and certainly the million plus ISO that's some numbers that make the marketing people in Nikon happy. But the D7200 has an excellent sensor, and this is going to be better. It's hard to ask for more. Some of you out there are going to go, yeah, but it's not full frame. Please keep in mind that not all photographers are better with full frame. There are many types of photographers, action, sports, wildlife, to name a few, where a DX or a crop sensor is going to give them better results in the type of shooting they're doing, and it's going to cost less. This camera for those people is better than any full frame on the market that costs less than $5,000, and arguably better than several that cost more than the D5 even. Now, there are loads of Nikon shooters that have been waiting patiently for the D300s successor, and this is it. We skipped over the D400. You can come up with all kinds of crazy reasons for that. Tsunami, bad luck in the Asian language with a 4 number, but for whatever reason, they've skipped that. We've gone right to the 500, and this should sell very well because we have a lot of people waiting. If we want to do a quick comparison against the 7D Mark II in ISO, it tops out at ISO 16,000. And the 7D Mark II was never at the top of its class in low light performance. The D7200 does better. It's not to say that the 7D Mark II is a terrible camera, but when you compare them just in low light performance, it's never done so well against its competitors. Now, I already mentioned the 10 frames per second and the capability of 200 full raw shots before you start to get a slowdown. Now, there's a catch to this. You're going to need to use that XQD memory slot. The D500 has 2 card slots, very nice, one for SD and one for that newer XQD. Right now, those cards are pretty costly. A 64 gigabyte is currently about $200 on B&H. You can get a very fast SD card for less than half that price. But the benefits of the XQD, they're built tougher, and of course they support faster write speeds. I'm going to believe we're going to slowly move away from CF and transition to this XQD in the prosumer and professional cameras, probably staying with SD and consumer levels still for many years as they're plenty fast enough. I'd love someone to set a reminder to tweet at me the price of that XQD card in a year. I suspect it's not going to be hugely cheaper, but like all memory, the price is going to continue a slow and steady march down. And if you plan on being thrifty and using just fast SD cards, that's fine, but you are certainly looking at slower number or less shots before the slowdown, somewhere between 64 and 112, depending on the size/compression of the RAWs you're shooting. So again, you only get that 200 when you're using those pricey but fast XQD cards. It's a pretty significant difference. Now, 2 card slots is nice, and I have to say splitting them between a current standard and the coming standard seems like a good compromise to me. Some people are wondering why they didn't go the D5 route where you can choose one or the other. The simple answer is they tried to keep this D500 a little bit smaller and can't fit 2 XQD cards. So the AF system is the same as the $6,500 newly announced D5. So we've got a $2,000 camera with a $6,500 camera autofocusing system in there. That's 153 autofocus points, 99 cross type, which are the higher accuracy. But again, we've got some marketing speak here and we need to pull back a little bit. Truthfully, only 55 points are selectable, 35 cross type points are selectable. Still, an impressive coverage, especially when you look at that coverage across the frame and compare it again to something like the 7D Mark II, which has been a class leader up until now. You see a difference. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. And if you were tracking erratically moving subjects, say soccer players maybe, having the ability to not lose tracking even when they move out to the edge of the frame is really nice. The central focusing system is good down to -4 EV. This is really helpful in low light. The 7D Mark II is rated at -3, and for comparison, I'm thinking about this often as a wedding photographer shooting in low light environments, my 5D Mark III is just -2 EV. EV is exposure value, how far under the middle exposure the camera is capable of focusing. This also helps with the use of teleconverters. As you lose light when you stack those, you still got 15 focus points at f8, 5 are the cross type. This is important when you look at who this camera is targeted at, wildlife photographers that often want to get as close to possible to their subjects. So let's recap those stats quickly. 10 frames per second with a very deep buffer if you're shelling out for the faster cards, solid autofocus and great coverage across the frame, and what will likely be class-leading ISO performance. Photographers, not much to complain about at this point, if anything. Let's talk briefly about size, shape, form, function. This isn't a small camera. It's going to be slightly larger and heavier than Nikon's own full-frame D750, but still slightly smaller than the 7D Mark II, which personally is one of my ergonomically favorite cameras. It fits perfectly in the hand, so it's going to be very similar in size and shape to that. And this means it balances nicely with longer lenses, which is very good because, again, a lot of people buying this will be putting those on. It's weather sealed, though Nikon admits a bit less than their $6,500 D5. No built-in flash, but that does provide some room for the viewfinder. We have 100% coverage. And the LCD is tilting and touch capable. This is nice. Playback control, touch to focus, as well as touch shutter, which allows you to touch the screen to trigger the camera to take a picture, are all possible. Nikon also mentions there's a soft latch that keeps the screen against the body, except when you want to pull it out. An articulating screen and a touch screen on a camera are one of those things you don't really value until you've experienced. I was in the camp of I don't need a touch screen on my professional level cameras. It's got all the buttons, but there are times where it's very helpful. And an articulating screen, now that I'm shooting kind of on travel with the Sony, which has an articulating screen, I really miss that when I step back to my 5D Mark III. It's really nice to be able to shoot at those various angles and still be able to see what you're doing. And for those of you who are like, touch screens are bad, they're going to take away my physical buttons, on all of these DSLRs currently, for at least the time being, there are no sacrifices made with physical buttons. So if you don't want to use the touchscreen, you don't have to. So some might be grumpy that they left off a flash, but really this is minor. You're going to be much better off buying a nice cheap Yongnuo flash, less than $100. That's going to take you much further than any pop-up flash will. A couple of additional features that I want to mention. Nikon has auto AF fine-tune in the D500. This is really cool. Basically, the camera uses live view, which is its very accurate method of focusing, to determine the micro adjustment values to use with phase detection. So basically, the camera says, I know where this lens should be focused, and it relays that information to the brain of the camera, and it writes it into the value. So when you're switching and using these different lenses, after you run through this autofocus calibration, they're going to be as accurate as possible. This is potentially huge. I've got a few videos on the topic of microfocus adjustments, including a recent one on the Focal 2 software that makes it really easy. But if this works as written, you don't need anything at all. Your camera really just does all of the work. It also offers flicker reduction. The camera can detect when you're shooting under lights that flicker. Not that we can see, but the camera can detect. This is also in the 7D Mark II, and again, makes a big difference shooting in gymnasiums and other venues under that kind of terrible fluorescent lighting. It's going to provide you with much more consistent exposures. So what's there to complain about, or who is dismissing this camera as a joke? Videographers. Or I should say some videographers. You read the forums and it's like they've been personally insulted by this camera. Why? After all, it shoots 4K. It's one of the first DSLRs to do that. Well, there's a catch to that 4K. It's not the 3-minute recording limit that was initially reported. That's just a feature of the D5. You can only record 4K for 3 minutes with a Nikon D5. No, the D500 can go a full 29 minutes and 59 seconds. That is that EU camcorder tax law limit. The issue is the crop. So this is, as I've said, an APS-C camera. This is a 1.5x crop. When you shoot 4K, you get an additional crop for a total of 2.2x, or almost 2.2. That puts it in the same league as the GH4 and other micro 4/3 cameras. I actually have one right here. But with many of these, you can put a speed booster on and get some advantages. You can't do that with this camera. So if you have a kit lens, let's say the kit lens that comes with the D500, that's a 16 to 80. So you're starting at 16, suddenly you have a 35mm lens as your widest when you're shooting 4K. That's a deal breaker for some people that would really like to use these cameras as hybrid cameras, being able to shoot both without having to worry about carrying around a sack full of very wide lenses. For those wondering why you have this extra crop, without getting too technical, it's really mostly about heat, processing power, and costs. To read from the full sensor at fast enough speeds to avoid serious rolling shutter, you need lots of processing power and a way to dissipate all that heat that builds up. Nikon must have decided they couldn't reliably do that, or it would raise the camera cost higher than desired. If you shoot at 1080, you don't have that extra crop unless you enable the next feature. This is pretty cool. The Nikon D500 has introduced electronic VR, stabilization for video. This adds in a slight crop, not as much as the full 2/2x, but it can correct for horizontal, vertical, and even rotation. Pair that with a lens that has VR, and you have additional stabilization from both working together to nicely stabilize handheld video. A couple other features, you also have in-camera video time lapses, shooting 4K resolution and up to 9,999 frames. Like the Sony or the Canon 5DS, you can select this video or a series of frames as the output of the time lapse. As someone that enjoys shooting and using time lapses in our travel videos, I really appreciate having the camera do the work of making the video. And Nikon has introduced exposure smoothing and deflickering to help the quality of the output of these videos. What you don't have is good autofocus during video. Nikon DSLRs still rely completely on contrast AF during video. That's slow and very noticeable when refocusing. The Canon DSLRs with dual pixel and the STM lenses easily beat Nikon here, as do many of these mirrorless cameras. It's true, many professionals don't rely on autofocus, but some do, or if you just want easy camcorder-like video, the D500 is not going to provide it, and you don't have the helpful features that you see on many of the mirrorless, like focus peaking. Last few points. The connectivity of the D500 looks to be excellent. A similar system to the NX1 that I love. Once it's connected, it stays connected. It uses low-power Bluetooth to automatically send images to your phone. It's also useful to add geolocation data to your shots as you take them, as well as add additional notes, and can act as a remote control. If you need to pull many images off the phone, it intelligently switches to Wi-Fi to use that faster connectivity. And we've got illuminated buttons. This is pretty nice. You know, I'm very comfortable with my 5D Mark III shooting in low light environments. I can touch the buttons and know what I'm touching without even seeing them. But there are times when I'm reaching in from weird angles and I mispress a button. Illumination would be nice, and the D500 is adding that now. Overall summary. Fantastic camera for stills. Shows Nikon's got a strong commitment to the DX line. This is going to make action, sports, and wildlife photographers very happy. Hybrid shooters, videographers, you're probably less excited and probably should pass, or at least wait to see what the A6100 from Sony will offer. It's going to be announced very soon. On the photo side, you can't really compare these cameras. The AF speed and tracking of the Nikon is going to be far superior. On paper, they might seem very similar, but I feel confident the D500 is going to come out on top of that. But on the video side, you're going to have a much smaller and lighter body that very well might be capable of more impressive 4K video. Or, of course, the full-frame Sonys, or the GH4, or, well, you've got a lot more impressive video options for shooting 4K these days than what the D500 sounds like. And I mentioned the Canon 7D Mark II a couple of times. It's still an excellent camera, but at this point doesn't offer any real advantages over the Nikon, except that it is currently about $500 cheaper, and you can pair it with that Canon 100 to 400, which is a fantastic combination. I'm interested to see how that compares to the D500 paired with the new 200 to 500. I'd love to hear your opinions on this camera. Photographers, videographers, leave them below. If you appreciated this video, take a moment to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more gear reviews, how-to, and our travels. You can also follow on Instagram for more behind the scenes. If you plan on purchasing, please use my links below. And as I said, if you're serious about getting your hands on that D500 soon, you should get your pre-orders in as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.